Ebook title, The Secret in the Ruins. Chapter 1, The Unexpected Sound. My name is Samet, and I was 12 years old. That day, we were playing soccer on a dusty field outside our village. The evening had fallen, and the sky was pitch black. Only the distant village lights and the occasional sound of the wind could be heard. There were 3 of us, Yasin, Hassan, and me. When it was time to go home, instead of taking the usual path, we decided to cut through the abandoned, ruined houses nearby. These houses were places everyone in the village avoided. People believed that jinn lived there, and terrifying stories were passed down about them. But none of that crossed our minds at that moment. We just wanted to get home quickly. As we walked between the houses, every step echoed with crunches. The dusty road felt like it carried the weight of years of abandonment. Suddenly, we heard a strange sound from one of the houses. We stopped in our tracks. It sounded like a baby crying. First, one of us pointed it out, then we all looked at each other in shock. "Did you hear that too?" I asked. Yasin and Hassan's eyes were wide open. Yes, we had all heard it. We should have been scared, but our curiosity got the better of us. Slowly, we stepped towards the house where the sound had come from. It was completely dark inside. Still, our curiosity pushed us to enter through the door. But there was no baby, no light, just silence. A wave of coldness washed over us. We all felt an urgent need to get out of there. We bolted from the house and ran back towards the village road. At that moment, none of us questioned why we were running. The strangeness of what happened had completely taken over. When we reached the village, we realized the story didn't end there. Chapter 2, The Mysterious Dream. That night when I got home, I still couldn't shake off the shock of what had happened. When my mother tucked me into bed, she asked, "Did something happen?" I only replied, "I'm just tired," brushing off the question. But in my mind, the silence inside that house kept echoing. That night, I fell asleep, but it wasn't peaceful. I had a dream where I was back inside that abandoned house. This time, I was alone. The dark room was pulling me in. In one corner, a dim light flickered, and the baby's cry echoed again. I walked toward the light, but with every step, the crying grew further away. At some point, the sound suddenly stopped, and a thick fog surrounded me. From the mist, a figure appeared. I couldn't make out its face, but its hands were reaching out to me. A cold, eerie voice whispered in my ear, "Come, we've been waiting for you." At that moment, I screamed and woke up. I was drenched in sweat, and my heart was racing. It had to be just a dream, right? Chapter 3, Chasing Secrets. The next day, I met up with my friends. Yasin and Hassan looked just as uneasy as I did. They, too, had had a dream that night. When we realized we had all dreamt the same thing, the baby's cry, the figure, and that cold voice, it became even more unsettling. We knew we couldn't just ignore it. Yasin had an idea. There's an old man in the village, Haji Ibrahim. Everyone says he knows about strange events like this. Let's go to him. Maybe he can tell us something. Fear and curiosity were now intertwined. We had no other choice. We went to Haji Ibrahim's house. He led us inside and looked at us with a knowing gaze. "You kids saw something, didn't you?" he said before we even spoke. It was as if he already knew everything. We told him what had happened, and he sighed deeply. Those houses aren't empty, but their intentions aren't evil. The spirits of those who once lived there haven't found peace. That baby's cry might be the cry of a soul in need of help, he said. His words sent shivers down our spines. That night, we knew we couldn't muster the courage to go back to those ruins, but something he said stuck with us. If that spirit doesn't find peace, it won't leave you alone, he warned. Chapter 4, Facing the Truth. 3 days passed, but the dreams didn't stop. Every night, the same nightmare, the same figure, the same baby's cry. We realized we couldn't keep running from it. Finally, one night, we gathered our courage and decided to go back to the ruins. This time, we came prepared. We brought flashlights, some food, and a few dogs for protection. When we reached the house, our hearts were pounding. We were still scared, to be honest. But we also knew that we wouldn't find peace until we solved this mystery. We opened the door and stepped inside once more. This time, the baby's crying was clear. But this time, there was no mist, no overwhelming darkness. In the corner of the room stood an old, dusty cradle. Inside was a worn-out cloth doll. Yet the baby's cry still echoed. Suddenly, Haji Ibrahim's words came to my mind. The spirits of those who once lived there haven't found peace. We approached the cradle cautiously. As we stood in silence, trying to figure out what to do, a small girl appeared in the middle of the room. Her eyes were teary, but her face carried a sadness that pierced through us. In a faint voice, she said, "I can't find my mother." At that moment, we understood that this little girl's soul was searching for her mother, and she needed our help. With the guidance of Haji Ibrahim's teachings, we said prayers for the spirit. The cradle slowly disintegrated into dust, and the girl smiled before fading away. It was all over. Chapter 5, The Return of Peace. From that day on, the dreams and strange sounds no longer haunted us. Those abandoned houses were still there, but they no longer felt frightening. We knew that the little girl had found peace. And with that, we returned to our normal lives in the village. But every night, when I looked up at the sky or passed by those houses, I couldn't forget the sad look in that little girl's eyes. The end.